The first one is for yourself. You said that, you know, from the Unemployment Housing Action Committee and the concerned parents were the three great movements against working class movements. Now, what I want to know was it a mistake that you left out the provisional IRA or the IRA? Because in that period from the 1969, 1970 up until the present, it was practically all working class people. There were 15,000 Republicans served time. They'd done over 100,000 years collectively in jail. So certainly the working class were involved. The Dublin working class were in the British Embassy, so they were there in their tens of thousands. So obviously, in terms of the working class, the anti-colonial struggle in the north has been a major effect on the whole Irish people. And just wondered, did you forget about that? But also, in the question I want to bring up was, again, Pepe alluded to it. I had spoken with a fellow from the Black Panthers, a fellow called Ashanti, sorry. And he had told us about how the Black Panthers were organising politically within the ghettos in the United States. And the reaction of the state, from his point of view, was to flood the ghettos with heroin. Now, in 1981, there may have been some heroin around, but it really blossomed. And what happened in 1981, Bobby Sands stood for election. Sinn Féin said they were taking the electoral path. The place where they were gaining the support in general was in the poorest of working class areas in the cities, the very same places that have been hit. Now, I want to just ask, is it possible that the same strategy was employed by the state here as was employed by the state in the United States?
Okay, so I left the speaker. Can I answer my own first? Jim, the three movements I was referring to were specific social movements, which were born out of social conditions, you know. And it was within that context of unemployment, of housing and
of housing, jobs and votes.
Yeah, but I'm recognising that political movements of the 60s, 70s and 80s are also working class based on.
No, I just want to bring up that because the struggle in the north arose out of social conditions.
Sure. But they were specific social movements that had as agenda the attempt to alleviation of a specific social class.
However, this one, what I just spoke about on the normalisation, but I think that has to be recognised that the anti-drugs movement was primarily an anti-heroin movement. And it was effective in the sense that nobody really takes heroin now without knowing the dangers. Huge amounts of young people take dodgy coke, dodgy E, and a vast number of other drugs. There's definitely an acceptance of drug use. I think that would be probably a greater barrier to trying to re-enable an anti-drugs movement. I don't know whether it would be actually possible unless there was again an upsurge in what's seen as the demon drug of heroin. So I think that must be recognised, and that's why at the end I said I didn't have the answer, and I don't know if there is any potential or future in an anti-drugs movement. Just in reply to Jim on the Black Panthers and the decimation of their forces with the heroin, I don't believe that was the purpose in Dublin. I wouldn't credit the state with enough capability to do such a thing. I think it was more inability than anything, and if it was the case, they should have shot themselves in the foot, because Sinn Féin, Jim, when we started this game, were a fairly insignificant force. By 1999, they had a huge amount of councillors, and they had a foothold in almost every single working class constituency in Dublin, probably at the expense of the sticks, thank God. Legalisation, again, no disrespect to Pepe, and I admire and respect his opinion. I think it's a simplistic argument. I think the example of alcohol points to the fact that the argument really doesn't hold water. alcohol is now legal and has been since whatever 30s. The Irish society in particular has been destroyed by alcohol, and that's been recognised as one of the primary problems in this country, and I'm sure worldwide. So I don't believe, I think this myth about a war on drugs, there was no war on drugs for, I think me and Pepe are in agreement with that anyway. The most powerful country in the world used drugs to decimate a local rebellion in the Black Panthers, and I'm sure they likewise with the Latinos, they wouldn't be as familiar with. They also used heroin in the war against the Nicaraguans. So how can you say there's a war fought on drugs when the very same state are using drugs? If we walk 15 minutes from here into Sheriff Street, there's open drug dealing as we speak here. That's surrounded by 3 police stations, which, well, 2 anyway, I'm not sure. There's 3 still manned. But at least 2 manned police stations. If they miss that calls into question, you know, their whole strategy. I have no doubt that the police use drug dealing to oppress working class communities. I've no doubt the state do that. I've no doubt that the police use drug dealers as sources of information and are happy enough to maintain the situation within working class communities. But I don't believe that legalisation will impact on that. It certainly would impact on the criminal element and our profits, but it won't. The head shops are a good example. For a while they were legal and they caused utter devastation in an extremely short period, where I've seen experienced police officers stunned with the effect. Anna will confirm that, or Marina got beforehand, the reports to the JPCs we got, experienced police officers stunned with the effects. And again, reverting to a parochial viewpoint, as I said, 20 years on from the anti-drugs movement in Cabaret, there isn't an availability of heroin, an open availability of heroin. The availability of the drugs is my problem. If there is availability in a local area of the likes of heroin, there will be a proportion of youth that will try it. Clearly, that didn't happen in Cabaret. And again, I can only speak about Cabaret because that's where I'm from. I'm sure it could be, probably is the same elsewhere. I'm not saying Cabaret was any better or any worse than anywhere else, but clearly, the fact that drugs were not openly available had a very, very, very significant effect on drug addiction rates in my area. Thanks.
I just want Pepe to reply to this round and then you go another round.
Yeah, no, I'm going to reply first to the point that the gentleman here was just putting forward in relation to a global response to capitalism. I think that the drug trade is one of the most international ones, one of the most globalized ones, and certainly it requires an international outlook as a working class. I think that interaction between people, for instance, from the communities in Ireland and for people that actually depend on that, and I'm informing my perspective as well on legalisation on the needs of our own peasants that live in abject poverty as well, would be a most important type of exchange. So I'll come back to this in terms of, I think, in targeting the local community, and to a certain degree, community-direct action has one limitation, even though it's a good way to mobilize them, to create awareness, but the big limitation is that it targets people only within the community. And the big guys are living outside of the community. They're living in mansions that you cannot reach them. And you actually need to target it. You need to start a full campaign against the financial branches of these particular trade. Now, that said, I want to point out that the most serious effect, particularly or project, particularly in Colombia, to tackle the drug industry, was actually done by the FARC themselves, and it was done at the time of the peace negotiations back in 1998, 2002, and it was back in 2000 that the FARC called the United Nations, they called the OAS, they called all organizations and said, listen, we have here a comprehensive plan of 25 points. Give the peasants support to turn to agroecology, to diversify their crops, to do this and this and that. And I'll tell you something, the coke is going to be eradicated. we calculate in 8 to 10 years. That has never been discussed. And actually the people that boycotted it were the United States. At that time, and I know some people here may know very well because they were following Colombia at the time, at that time invented a Mickey Mouse kidnapping or something to break down such an historical and momentous event, a fateful event. Now, coming back to the point of legalisation, I don't think it's a simplistic argument. We've been building it up in over 25 years of debate and discussion, and obviously probably might seem the way because we're looking at it from a different perspective. Now, as I said, I'm basing it on 3 elements that were those that I described, on targeting actually the richest elements within the link instead of the poorest elements within the link. The second was the strengthening of the mafia, and that is something that's actually costing the lives of millions. Now look at Mexico. I mean, the current war on drugs has actually left 60,000 dead in 5 years. It's horrific. It's absolutely horrific. I mean, anything that happened in the north during the Troubles look like fireworks compared to this. You know, and no one cares about these as long as the people that are killed are darker than people sitting down in this room. And I'm telling you this very openly. But some people are expendable and some others are not. And I'll put this forward. Why is it all right to poison our peasants in Colombia, but it's not all right to poison cocaine users in Wall Street? It's just one basic question, you know? But obviously in one case there is comprehension, there is understanding, and in the other case it's just bullets and lead. And eat lead, because that's what you can eat. Why eat bread? Eat lead. You know? And then again, I listen to your experience and I see that it is okay actually to poison in other ways working class communities in Ireland. So obviously the strengthening of the mafia and targeting the weakest links of the chain, it is a class project. It has to be understood that way. Now, when I talk about legalization, I'm not saying drugs are all right. And in fact, every time that I say that I'm for legalization, people think that I'm a happy man on drugs and partying all around. And I have to acknowledge that all I did at one point was sneak glue when I was 12 years old. That's all. That's all. That's all. Apart from that, alcohol and coffee, I think are the only 2 drugs that I've done. But what's it? Solidity when I was 12. Just young chaps, you know, sick about everything. Now, coming back to the point, I think it needs a comprehensive response. It's not just about legalization, it's about legalization, it's about exposing the tentacles of big business in this, and it's about as well going on with a massive campaign of information about the reality of drug use. And not a campaign done by the state but led by actual communities, knowing the problem and the reality on the ground, because as someone said, the state always design campaigns ignoring the reality on the ground without any real knowledge of the real people.
Just to mention that COVID wasn't just a street campaign, just I wanted to let people know for history's sake. But what we were in our own areas is we've done a lot of work on the local end of it. We set up youth groups, community groups, festival groups, and on the bigger end of it, even in our own area, we established community resource centres. We established a community centre in Cabra, which was funded originally by the community. Every house in Cabra gave £20, raised £50,000 at the time, unheard of, that went ahead. You know what I mean? So it's just in case people thought it was a street thing. The other thing is, I just have to mention the myth that legalisation will solve all the evils. It's unbelievable that people say that when they realise if drugs were legalised in Ireland today or in the last 10 years, they would have been under the remit of Mary Harney and Dr. James Riley, who would have privatised it. And I can tell you, no people in Colombia would see $1 more, right? And what would happen was we would have an industry making profits. The mafia doesn't need to make the profits. The mafia are them people. You know, the situation is, I think Anna mentioned it in a one line, and I think it should be mentioned over and over again. We have third generational drug addicts in our society. The people's responsibility, the department's responsibility for resolving that have done nothing with 3 generations of people. They would be the people dealing with the legalisation of drugs. I think that has to be knocked on the head.
But as a communist, I thought my job was in living in Ballymore and also in Bartonstown. My job, as I felt it was part of education. That was to help attendant organisations look for ways and means to keep the kids, protect the children, get the drug dealers out of the way as much as we can. But I can tell you that in Ballymore, it was a long experience for me. and something now I don't regret it, but I've seen things that stick in my tongue, my stomach, and I see the way it feels about what's happening. I'm totally in favour of all community. Community has the right to defend itself, even to the extent of kicking the bass at the, but there must be the community that has to agree on the strategy and tactics. In terms of and I think, as I said, in Ballymore there was 50% unemployment. It's 50%, and it's heading back that way now. So part of the solution has to be education.
Children and young people idea about what drugs are really going to do to them and trying to stop them. But I think there's a very important issue of education here. The majority of people who work in class, who work in these areas, like whether they're teachers or doctors or nurses or social workers or whatever, they have no idea. They have a very hazy idea of what the concerned parents did all those years ago, and they need to be educated. Now, there was one book I read and I thought was very informative, particularly about the Josie Dwyer case, and that's a very important case I mentioned, because it showed how the entire country was given a completely wrong view of what was happening. And it was a book called Pushers Out. What's the name of the fellow who wrote it again? Is that you? Well, it must be read and it must be mentioned, you know, because and it's very well written, I think. And I don't know, it was right there, so you didn't know whether it was on. There was also a very good documentary film that was shown only once at the Documentary Film Festival about 3 years ago, never shown since. The IFA has never shown it. And it was about the concerned parents, the second wave of it. Do you remember? They interviewed everybody in a room. I think it was called Interview Room.
Meeting room.
That's it. Would you say that gave a good idea of what things about it? Yeah. Yeah, but that also I think should be shown. We'll try and show it here.
A crowd of visuals.
Yeah, it's just about education, and that those books and those films should always be highlighted.
A lot of people, liberals and the liberal left, and say, well, it's the solution in itself. But I mean, I don't think it is. I mean, surely if by calling for legalisation, you're saying, well, that problem will always exist, and we might as well just regulate it as best we can. I think the solution has to be to try and cut down on or even eliminate drugs, certainly certain drugs. I mean, even if you look at like liberalisation of gambling, I mean, it didn't cut down on illegal gambling. Maybe it did, but you've seen a huge expanse of gambling and bookies and working class people. Which, I mean, do people think gambling is a drug? Well, it certainly exploits a lot of working class communities, picks on their fears and exploits their dreams, maybe. So, I mean, will legalisation of drugs actually cut down on drug use? I don't think it will. And there's also the point about the left and how it relates to maybe drug dealers and things like that. I mean, the left is always great for saying, well, the problem is capitalism, and we'll fix education, unemployment, things like that, and eventually the next generation will go away. But people have fears in the present, right and now, and the left isn't addressing them. People living with dangerous gangs or dealers in their estates, they don't want to hear about a solution over 20 years about eliminating exploitation. They need a problem now, and the left completely fails on that. Whether it be the middle class left, who is completely against what we see as vigilantism, or maybe the ultra left, who've got this romantic vision of the working class and shouldn't do certain things, and they don't do this. So I think in many ways working class people get played in the hands of the law and order Fine Gael types who think, well, maybe Fine Gael are making the right noises on law and order and longer sentences, but of course Fine Gael don't give a shit about working class communities or cutting down on crime. But the fact is, protection and safety in working class communities is a left issue. I mean, if socialists aren't interested in keeping working class people safe and protected in their own communities, then you have to set up for that. You can't just hand over protection to the right or surrender that issue for them, because they don't care about them, and the socialists do have to protect people.
I just want to say that I'm just back from Colombia. The priority of the Colombian state is not to eliminate drugs, is to repress people's organisations. And what we're hearing from Dublin, the state's priority was to repress the organisation of working class communities.
Something saying that, and I think we've been wrong to take that message from it. And I think we do have to take on board like the horrifying stuff that is going on, you know, and it's not right for us to be campaigning in our own country and turn our backs on what is going on around the world. And even it actually comes home to us. I was just at a thing recently, and there was a man speaking at it, and he was working for one of these banks. What is it? Joe? I can't remember the name of the bank. Anyway, but they've been prosecuted and found guilty of laundering drugs from the Mexican cartels. And this guy was saying, the famous bond holders that we are now all bailing out, he said, you go find out how much that money is Mexican drug cartel. That is where it goes on. And I mean, the connections are all over the place. You know, and I don't think it's a simplistic. It's not like, I don't think anybody is saying legalisation, but I think we shouldn't approach it on that level that it's the solution. There is no solution, and there is no one thing that is a solution. It's like about the education. Of course, if there's education around drugs, because they're there, they're part of life. But again, it's like it's one piece of a whole approach. And again, I think they use that because sometimes life is just crap, and you need something to help you through. And there is an element of that, and I think the idea that we can have a society where no drugs. So I think the fundamental things that it comes down to is that we had a society where people were relatively equal. You could say there is some potential for managing drugs or legalising them. Yeah. But within a scenario like we live in now, where we have a completely unequal society, and some society, some class basically, some people are protected, can protect themselves, can use their resources to protect themselves, and other people can't. And I think that's the core of what we're looking at. It's back to, Noel's point there. At the end of the day, it's an economic class argument, and anything about legalisation, there is no other way of it.
The majority of our initial committee in Cabinet were community activists that ran the football clubs. There was very, very few political activists, as I would consider myself. There was very, even Sinn Féin, there were very few compared to the majority being people who ran the football clubs, people involved in the local church and all that. It was very, very community based. I agree with Brendan, the point he made, just that legalisation to me is the feels, because I don't believe the issue has been tackled. I fully agree with that. It will never be solved. People will take drugs. I don't actually disagree with people taking drugs if that's a personal choice. My disagreement is with them selling drugs to kids and making drugs available in disadvantaged and at-risk areas like the ones that we live in. That's my... the conflict between the Colombian peasants and the Dublin working class, that I don't know how we can ever resolve that. It's really, really, really difficult, Using an extreme example, if, the peasants of wherever decided that child porn was a form of income for them, Like, does that mean that's acceptable because it's their only source of income? I honestly don't have the answer. I really don't, but I do recognise that it's a huge issue that must be addressed. I do recognise that, and I don't dismiss Pepe's arguments. I don't dismiss the points he made. I just thoroughly and 100% disagree with legalisation. And the easy thing is the point question.
There's very little points in calling somewhere to speak if you don't know this third debate. So I'm very pleased with the result today. But I have to say just the one thing: the international bourgeoisie got another triumph in this kind of level of debate we're having, because it managed to put, once again, the poor against the poor. The poor in Connelly against the poor in Dublin city centre. Yeah. How to solve that? Still, I don't have a question. And that's why I say that the more exchange and to listen to one another, it is a big thing. I don't expect the capitalist class to solve the problem of drugs. I'm not expecting it, not for a second. That's why I'm here now talking to CPI. That's why I'm not doing the argument with Kevin Myers or someone else. Okay? I do believe that the problem of growth is not going to be solved by it. But I do think that the working class together can find ways to listen to one another and work around this issue. The only, and I'm going to come back to this, because pay a pension, the only significant program to eradicate coca production in Colombia was designed by the FARC, by poor peasants. It wasn't designed by the bourgeoisie, and they boycotted it actively. I was saying that three elements could be regulated. One was the control of the mafia, and I do think that that's the case. The second thing was to make evident the most profitable links of the drug trade. And I do think that through illegalization, they're going to be, they're made invisible. And the third element is the fact that repression is used against the legal elements. I'm just wondering about the working class, again, how poor people are put against poor people, even in poor communities. A push that's poor against, I mean, the sheer scale of the atrocity in Mexico cannot be denied. And I don't want to be disrespectful to the Republican struggle. And a lot of comrades here know how respectful I am. And often I find myself, as a Latin American citizen, defending the Republican struggle against the arguments of reactionary other people. So I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about decapitations, I'm talking about mutilations, I'm talking about millions of people being displaced, I'm talking about the sheer atrocity of it. It cannot be denied. And that's the direct result of criminalisation. We go back to the same point. Why is that okay to keep going on? I want to stop. And we have not to lose sight from a revolutionary struggle. And that takes what the fine young chap was saying there. How communities get organised, how communities relate to one another, how you strengthen communities in Ireland, how you make self-defence an element of public debate, because obviously the Gardaí are not defending the children. Sure. How